Okay, go ahead.
Good afternoon. Thank you for being here. It's October 4th, 2021, 1 p.m., and we will be calling the Subcommittee on Social Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion to order. I'm going to start with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge and honor the indigenous communities of this region and recognize that that we are situated on the traditional homelands of the Nuwuvi Southern Paiute people. We offer gratitude for the land itself, for those who have stewarded it for generations, and for the opportunity to study, learn, work, and be in community with this land. We encourage everyone in this space to engage in continued learning about the indigenous people who work and live on this land since time immemorial, including the Las Vegas Paiute tribe and the Mawapa Band of Paiutes, and about this historical and present realities of colonialism. As one of the most diverse places, it is important to recognize and appreciate the use of Southern Paiute land, and as a part of its mission to be a welcoming and inclusive place to work and learn. Thank you. We'll start with public comment. We're going to ask that you limit your public comments to 2 minutes. State your name, come up here if you wanted to give public comment. We will have public comment again at the end of the committee hearing. This is the time for public comment. Oh, I'm supposed to do roll call. My apologies. You can have a seat. Member Ogden? Here. Member Scott?
Here.
Member Ullman?
Here.
Member Harris? Please mark Member Harris tardy or absent. And Chair Goins here. Now, public comment. Thank you.
Oh, yes, no worries. Hello, I'm Ron Baker. And what I can say is I have my hand in a few different areas of the community, cannabis community and industry. I've been around for a while. And at this point, I'm just willing to help out in any way I can as far as education, as far as history, play around on the cultivation side, retail, production. So I'm willing to help out with any information, any facts or falsehoods that are out there that but I know last week we mentioned the vape pens, and some of the vape pens having more than probably about 30 to 50 hits per cartridge, so it's kind of hard to have a vape pen for someone hit. I know they have smaller amounts like the disposable ones, so maybe like about a 0.1. And then also for the pre-rolls, they have those different brands. One of them is called Baby J's, and it's maybe about 0.2 or 0.3 in there. So the smaller amounts would definitely, as I call it, microdosing, would definitely help out with that. And of course, that's after we handle the fact about people bringing in their own, material and stuff like that. But yes, microdosing and non-smoking and smoking consumption lounges should definitely be on the table, because edibles are definitely going to take over and more people are going to move away from smoking. So you don't have to even worry about the smell and everything like that. It's just more so, main dishes, beverages, and stuff like that that people still can consume. But at this point, my name is Ron Baker, and I'm here for whatever you guys need me for. So,
thank you for your comment.
Thank you.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning.
Oh, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
My name is Berwin Tompkins. I'm an owner of a trusted vendor education in Illinois. Also, I'm a consultant that has been through a couple of years of process as far as social equity in Illinois. I originally started my business here in Nevada when you all went through the first licensing process. I got a lot of my education in Nevada. I'm from Illinois, so I took it back to Illinois. Quite successfully. They have a lot of knowledge as far as the social equity component, how it didn't work. So Illinois, for example, the veteran component actually landed Illinois a lot of court because you had to have a veteran on your team in order to have a perfect score. So we're also attached to a group that has a perfect score, which was SBIL. So we pretty much have been successful in the Illinois market. I'm just trying to come back here. It's a couple components in your bill as far as like the consumption line, there's big opportunities with that. And I like the legislation as far as the microdosing on site. So there's different things that I feel like a lot the social equity component can provide a lot of opportunities to rebuild neighborhoods that are disproportionate. So thank you for allowing me to sit. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you for your comment.
Thank you.
Do we have any persons online waiting to give comment?
No public comment.
No? Thank you. All right, we have a lot to cover today. So we're going to move to item 2. I think we made good headway last meeting, and so we're going to continue with some of the things that we discussed, trying to finalize some items. On item 2, we're identifying areas that were disproportionately affected by policing. What I will say is Sarah and I called every organization we could think of that could and should have access to this information. It seems that no one in Nevada has asked for this type of information. I just find that extremely difficult to believe. However, what we were able to do, because we, an organization here in town, Cannabis CEIC, did work on a bill that would decriminalize, I shouldn't say that, but that would allow those young people under 21 to be able to sell their records if they were had cannabis issues from police or from juvenile. And so I did have those.
All right.
They were, had cannabis.
Listening to you live before.
Okay, that was weird. And so what I do have in hand, and all of the members have in hand, is a couple of the studies from Juvenile Justice Services, and there are some top tier referral zip codes. There are 10 that they have identified. And so I don't think that the information is conclusive. However, it is a place to start, to say the least. So I'm going to just read the zip codes. And then what we're going to have to do, I think, is allow a little more time to see if this information can be identified, and then how we can get it identified. And then if not, then we need to think about maybe how can we identify disproportionate areas, right? And there are other criterias, and so we'll discuss that. Thanks to Member Scott, we have a little bit of information on some of one of the other states that have used a criteria, and we'll discuss that now. So first, the top 10 zip codes we have is 89115. I was kind of surprised when I saw this. This is a 2019 study. And the top tiers is 89115, 89030, 89121, 89110, 101, 108, 015, 106, 031, and 122. So what I will say is the zip code that surprised me was 89115.
So this is from the Juvenile Justice Services for like the
For offenders, we would call them offenders, yeah. So referral, so if you were an offender and they would refer you to the detention program, these are where the most referrals, the zip codes, the most referrals would come from. So if the police pulls you over, so let's say this is how it works. If you're a youth and the police catch you in an action that is breaking what they would consider breaking the law. I'm tiptoeing around my language here. That they would consider breaking the law. And once they identify you as a juvenile, they refer you to the juvenile justice system. So that's what these are referrals. Does that answer your question? And so,
So Chair, these don't actually reflect incarcerations, just the fact that police maybe made contact with these juvenile offenders,
yes,
possible offenders.
Gotcha. And they were booked
Gotcha.
in some capacity, because that's the only way that they can identify where they come from.
Gotcha.
And, it's probably important to say that, so this report this is a peer report. I have not altered the data, but I think it's important to say that the reason why I pulled this report originally for that organization is because what we were trying to do is identify the disproportionate ethnicities that were being detained, that youth, right? And so if you see these numbers, I mean, it's still.
I'm looking at the map on the computer, Madam Chair, and it looks like 89115 is kind of near Nellis Air Force Base.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up in North Las Vegas, so I know it's 89030 is North Las Vegas.
Same.
89031 is also North Las Vegas.
Yes, 89101 is downtown.
Yep.
And that makes sense.
Yeah.
So then, as you were pointing out, 89115 is the reason why I say that I was a little surprised is because I was under the assumption that that area had mostly Air Force youth. However, I made a phone call to a friend that I know that lives there, and he said, "Why the hell did you think that?"
Come on, by Nellis?
Yes.
No,
And I'm reading statistical information, Madam Chair, and it says racial majority says white is 21.76%, Hispanic is 71%.
So that's the areas that.
And the unemployment rate's 11%.
11%. There you go.
So that fits within your
that fits.
area.
Mm-hmm. So the question originally was, can we identify the places? And obviously we can.
Mm-hmm.
So this, I'm stuttering a little because I had a conversation recently and they were like, Aisha, you definitely don't want to say the police is over policing somewhere. So I'm tiptoeing around the conversation of over policing and just saying that these are areas where we have identified persons that are disproportionately affected by policing.
Right. Madam Chair, when I pulled the Colorado information for their affirmation of eligibility for social equity licenses for marijuana, and they say that an applicant, resided for 15. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. The applicant has resided for at least 15 years between the years of 1980 and 2010 in the census tract designated by the Office of Economic Development and International Trade as an opportunity zone or designated as a disproportionate impacted area. A disproportionate impacted area is defined as a census tract in the top 15% of the following: unemployment, school dropout rate, poverty, the number of individuals receiving public assistance.
I think that's how we should do it because it goes hand in hand anyway. Just like that.
So
I like that. Yeah, I like the language. It keeps us out of trouble. It's simpler for CCB to
like that.
agree.
And you'd have to do a study in order to make the determination that it's not over police, but a one that police activity is higher in those areas.
Yes.
You'd have to either contact Metro, the sheriff would have to assist with regard to that, I don't know if they keep statistics. But this may be a kind of tried and true designated area.
And we know that it'll be current as well because census, we've just completed census. So here's one of my concerns is that because of the pandemic, I don't know how thorough the census is because I know that they weren't able to collect all the information that they were hoping to collect. And so will the numbers be true? I'm going to be honest, that's a concern of mine. I
mean, we can suggest that they take a few years, like more than don't just look at this year, but maybe look over the past few years to compare because COVID's going to change them unemployment numbers and everything right now.
The problem is we're growing so fast. We're still at phase. We're just not going through redistricting now.
Exactly.
And we have to do that before January. So we're relying on those census numbers, Madam Chair, that even though they may not be I don't know. It may be an argument to be made that they maybe weren't complete given the pandemic, but those are the numbers we have to rely on for redistricting. So
And
I think
then
we have to rely on them.
They can't take a few years census and compare and do that kind of.
Well, the numbers
Census are every 10 years.
Yeah, the numbers have crept up
Yeah.
since 2010 or 2011.
Yeah.
So they probably wouldn't be as accurate.
So I want to make sure that everyone knows census are every 10 years. And so what we would be doing is taking 10 years census. And definitely the state is in a very different space today than it was 10 years ago. And so, but I do hear you, Member Scott, the census are the census, and that's the information that everyone is using. What do you think, Member Ullman?
Question, are any of those zip codes in Northern Nevada? I'm not familiar with them.
They are not. All these are in Southern Nevada.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that just what we pulled, or did we do any analysis of Northern Nevada?
Well, what we can do, these zip codes wouldn't be hard. They would just be what we're looking at, but we absolutely can pull the juvenile justice services for statewide. These numbers are just as it relates to, there was a study done. Does it make sense to use this information? Do we see this as accurate information?
Gotcha.
Because the Cannabis Compliance Board, when they would be pulling this, can they use these statistics? Does it make sense?
And Madam Chair, to Member Ullman's point, I do see, because I'm looking at the Reno zip codes and none of them are on this chart, but it maybe makes sense to use kind of what the criteria that Colorado used, because it doesn't necessarily talk about those police areas, but it does talk about if there are opportunity zones, if they meet the unemployment, school dropout, poverty, which someone could extrapolate means they were the kind of the over-policed areas. You know, so we may be able to use those criteria rather than using by zip code, since it doesn't affect Northern Nevada as well.
I agree. I feel comfortable steering a little bit away from over-policed areas just based on some of the conversations that I have had over the week. And with that being said, I think if we discuss, because Member Ogden had said last week, we should be looking at those persons that are in lunch programs or maybe Pell Grants. You know, that was some of the conversations that we had. I would be willing to say taking away from what we know they've done. I don't think this program is active yet. I know that these are what they're asking, but I don't know if it's active. But I like the unemployment rate is more than 120% of the national average. I really like that because we could extract that easily. Go ahead.
It's just so, right now the unemployment rate, there's people unemployed that have never been unemployed before.
Agreed.
It's just different now. Now it's a totally different time. So where people were doing well, 6 months ago, they're unemployed, so they're not normally would be counted in this situation, but they are now. So I just want you, just to keep that in mind when we're looking at unemployment rate. I don't think it's going to be the same in a year because people are going to start going back to work. Hopefully.
Would it be easy to identify Title I schools and what zip code they're in, and then also use that as a metric?
Well, we talked about that as a metric last meeting, and we moved away from it. That was one of the things that we brought up, and we moved away from that.
I see.
And I think what we need, and one of the reasons is because people get zone variance. We're talking about schools, there's all those type of things. I think what we want to move is further into how we can use the census tract. I think that's a safe place because those numbers are the numbers.
And Madam Chair, I don't know if Commissioner Ullman or Member Ullman has this that I sent to Sarah this morning.
Yeah, Sarah emailed it.
Oh, did she? Okay.
Great. Thank you.
Sarah, you did email the information from Member Scott.
I think she just meant it to you, Chair.
I just sent it to you, but I can send it to the other members.
Oh, yes, please. My apologies.
Because Member Ullman, if you look at the information I got from Colorado, page 10 of 12, kind of lays out their criteria, the eligibility criteria, and talks about that.
Yes, I did like Colorado's. variables here.
All right, so what do we think about the SNAP program?
Yeah.
20, I agree with you, Member Ogden, maybe the unemployment rate at this junction is maybe not be the best way to identify, because, especially in Nevada, because of where we're at with the casino. So maybe that's not the best way, but I think the household SNAP program, that's a yes for me.
And what's the SNAP?
I think that would be one variable. Like I said, I know that, Councilman Creer is always talking about the fact that Ward 5 has a 15% unemployment rate, and that's been even before the pandemic.
Right.
So I think maybe that SNAP program can also be one of the criteria that someone shows that they're eligible for the social equity license. So I think that program, as well as unemployment and all the other ones we talked about, would be ways that an applicant can show that they're within these particular zones or areas.
Well, I think what can happen is CCB can identify that based on the census tract. So the census tract will say, because if I remember, I had to pull some information just recently. So I remember it can be sorted where they can look for this, and this, and that will be the zip codes statewide that would fall in one of the criteria, because it's not even all of the criteria. Okay, so just for conversation, because they're not reading what we're reading. It says a poverty rate of least than 20%, 75% or more of the children participate in federal free lunch program. 20% of the households receive benefits under the Supplement Nutrition Assistance Program, which we know is SNAP. And the average unemployment rate is more than 120% of the national average for at least 2 consecutive calendar years immediately preceding the date of application.
So that's not
good.
bad.
Yeah, that's really good.
And we may want to extend that to maybe 3 years.
3 years.
It's been 2 years, almost COVID now.
Yep.
Yeah.
I like
so that.
that.
Actually helped.
At least 3 years.
Okay.
That'd be good. Okay. I can agree.
So,
Madam Chair, what did you think about that first part about the high rate of arrest, conviction, or incarceration related to the sale of marijuana, that top part?
that's what I'm trying to get away from.
Oh, are you? Okay.
Yeah, and the reason why I'm trying to get away from it is because we'd have to pull the study.
Yeah, okay.
And so if we can just do it based on, because the CCB has to make this component of the licensing application available within the next 3 to 4 months, right? So what we don't want to do is put them in a situation where they have to
push it back.
Do a
Yes,
study or something,
Yes.
push it back.
we want
Gotcha.
to consider how they can do this swiftly
Right.
and stay within this timeline.
I mean, the good and the bad part of all of that is usually these all run hand in hand anyway. So
Yeah.
we know it'll be covered to some degree.
And it'll be nice that if down the road you see a need for adding something later
Agreed.
on, you can probably add this, or they could probably do a study in the interim.
I agree. And I think there's even a conversation to be made that this opens the opportunity to say, hey, this is something we should have identified. This is a study that needs to be funded. Let's get this study on the records, because it's still bothersome to me that it doesn't exist, but that's neither here nor there.
And then when we talk about expungement and all these things that are still trying to get worked out, this would fall on that end anyway, because when programs come together for trying to take someone from the black market into the legal market and incentivizing that type of situation and programs, this would fall into that study and like why it's important.
Yeah.
I just think this should go there too.
I agree.
Illicit market.
Thank you.
Yeah, I like it.
I like it also. So I think what we'll suggest is, what we're talking about is item 2, identifying areas disproportionately affected by policing. We're going to move to say that we're asking that we identify a poverty rate of at least 20%, 75% or more of the children participate in a federal free lunch program, 75% of the area, 20% of the households receive benefits under the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, which is SNAP, and average unemployment rate is more than 120% of the national average for at least 3 years, 3 consecutive calendar years.
Yeah.
I like it.
I like it.
That's clean. They can pull the data. I think that's fair.
Without any waiting or pausing, I can pull this.
Yes.
And it's measurable.
And it's measurable.
Which is the most important part, that it is measurable criteria.
Agreed. And then that will bring us back to one of the things that, because it says residents' timeline to qualify, that will bring us back to being 5 years having to be in these areas. I like it.
And Madam Chair, so do we want to, with those criteria, those 4 criteria you referenced, do we want, so we don't want to do anything with regard to unemployment or school dropout rates or public assistance?
Well, these are public
Okay.
assistance.
That's only through SNAP. If you have
Yes.
Is that only if you have children,
Well,
or is that?
so
SNAP
No, you don't have to.
because what they're doing is I wanted to make sure that we're saying the same thing.
Yes.
What they're saying is one of the following, you have to fit one of the following criteria.
Gotcha.
What we're saying is these are the criteria to identify the areas that persons must reside in to be
Gotcha.
considered a social equity applicant.
Makes sense. Okay, I got you.
All right. So I just want to make sure that we're saying the same thing.
Yep, makes sense.
All right.
Yeah.
You understand? All right. You have any questions, Member Ullman?
No, I agree with you.
All right. All right. That wasn't too stressful. Moving to item 3, incentives to work with social equity applicants. This is, so when we talk about social equity applicants, we are always discussing how this looks financially, because we know, I don't want to assume a social equity applicant doesn't have access to funding. I'm never going to assume that. What I will say is that the numbers across the nation have proven that money is a barrier to entry into the cannabis industry. And so what we want to do is create a scenario where these licensees, these potential licensees, can attract investors and current operators to do business with these lounges. What we don't want is the current licensees who are established businesses to feel like these independent licenses are going to be their competition.
Yeah.
So the elephant's in the room. I'm just gonna sit it on the table so that we can address it, right?
Madam Chair, I think there'll always be competition just because they're going to do the same. They just happen to be an independent lounge versus one that's tied to a dispensary. So I think there'll always be that feeling of competition. I think the independents will have to be a little bit more unique in what they offer in order for them to be successful.
I agree. What I don't want is to create a scenario where the owners feel like they have to swallow them up or step on them or come for them, right? I don't want, and it's these conversations, the regulations, and how we dialogue about our suggestions is how they will position themselves in business. And so what I want to do is have a dialogue about how can we incentivize the current licensees who will be in management agreements with these social equity applicants to provide product or either to allow delivery. How do we position these social equity applicants so that it makes their business attractive?
And that was one thing we had brought up that I was a little confused about. I don't know if the attorney for the AG is on here on the line, but I didn't believe that an independent can be owned by someone who currently has a dispensary license. So because they have the ability to have those other lounges that are connected to them, I didn't think that one of them could own an independent. I thought the independents had to be strictly independent.
They cannot.
And not owned by any of them. So there wouldn't be a partnership, an opportunity to partnership with any of the dispensaries. You'd have to come from either out of state or somewhere else that they'd get that partnership, right?
So the partnership is implied, right? The regulation says that license, that consumption lounge licensee should have a management or should have an agreement with one of the retailers to provide cannabis, either the sale, if there's going to be a sale component, or the delivery, if there will be a delivery component. That's not this committee. I'm not going to make that decision. But what I will say is we want to position this licensee, this applicant, to be attractive to those owners so that they will want to provide delivery or sales or whatever. So, and member Ogden have brought this up. We're never thinking of how to position it so that it is of value to those current owners. And this is the time for us to do that. We want these owners to want to do and desire to do business with our equity applicants. So this is the conversation for that.
Okay, I got a question. I think you just said that so how it's written now, they actually have to have a contract whether you be a social equity license or a regular licensure from a dispensary owner, you have to have a contract in place with, is it just one retailer or as many retailers as you have to have a license, a contract, one or many?
One or many.
Well, I'm assuming the dispensary will have their own license, for their own.
Right, I'm just trying to get the minimum.
Consumption lounge, because they could be next door to it.
Yeah.
They can't have a door in between, I don't believe, but they can be next door, and I imagine they would supply their own.
Right.
line.
So, but it's written one or more. Right?
Yes. So, member Scott, there are 3 licenses available.
Okay.
Right. There's a retail license, which is the dispensary retail license.
Right.
Those dispensaries currently can have 1 retail license.
Gotcha.
Then there is the independent license. And the social equity license isn't necessarily a license, but I'm going to use it for that in this conversation so that you can differentiate one from the other.
Okay.
So what will happen is those independent licensees, according to the regulations, will have to have an agreement where they will receive product from the owners of the dispensaries now.
For the or I guess the people that are in the consumption lounge would have to order from them.
Exactly.
Okay, gotcha.
And it would either be delivered or sales may be provided later. But either way, the middle person is the dispensary that will be doing business with that person.
Correct.
Okay. And so what we want to do is position those licensees, those consumption lounge SE applicants specifically, so that those owners find this relationship attractive.
Gotcha. Yep, makes sense.
So Chair, I think, with the amount of consumption lounges that we'll have versus the amount of dispensaries that they could partner with, the social equity applicants and independent applicants will have a lot of attractive offers. So dispensaries can be their main supplier, right? And I think one thing that would be attractive, and I don't even know if this is more of just a business decision between them, but spreading out the terms, or let's say you have a large dispensary that can help in some way, provide kind of like a creditor, where they are giving them really, really generous terms for like 6 months, or just working with them on the financing. I think one way that could help and make it more attractive to the independent lounges on who to work with. But I do see, if I'm a dispensary, like I'm definitely going to want to service as many of these as possible and be the dispensary of choice. So that's just one idea, but I don't know if that would come from us or if that's really up to the dispensaries and how they want to do that.
Well, it's always up to the dispensaries. It's always up to the current licensees how they want to do business. and I agree with you, Member Ullman. I do realize that because it will only be 20 licenses, maybe, right? And 10 will be SEs, that would make them attractive, sure. But that doesn't mean that they won't try to swallow them up.
Yes. So think where we can come in is like some kind of price gouging, price gouging standards or regulations, making sure that the taxes between the dispensary and the lounge, the independent lounges, are at a certain level so that consumers are able to purchase reasonable prices. But how do we make sure, that they're not taken advantage of, and price gouging comes to mind?
I think if anything, you got to look on both sides of this. You got to look at what is in it for me as a dispensary. You can't just always say give. People have to get stuff back as well. It has to be an incentive on both sides. If anything, it should be a tax break for someone doing business with a nonprofit or a social equity applicant or whatever. It needs to be treated kind of like that.
Yep.
So give the dispensaries the incentive. That's who you need to give the incentive to, because they're going to pass it through to the social equity person as well. Okay. So if they give this break to them, then they get their break as well. So both sides, right? I'm not saying only give it to them, but because they're able to give better prices to your example. If they show that, if they show a discount that was given, maybe they can write that off. If they show a certain amount of incentives given or contracts or certain length of contracts with X amount, they get an incentive, they get a tax break. I mean, that's where you're going to hit people where it counts in their pocket.
And I'm assuming that the lounges would even promote certain dispensaries that they have contracts with.
Absolutely.
So that would be kind of a
of course.
And Chair, I was, just coming from the aspect of the locals where we did all the licensing and everything else. A lot of the dispensaries don't have the room to have another something attached to them, so you wouldn't find a lot of them being attached to a dispensary. So they have to rely on these independents to do what they can't do, because the fact that they're landlocked doesn't allow them to be able to have that type of thing.
Yeah, nor can they get something right next door. Correct. I mean, who has just something sitting there? Yeah,
and we also have to consider too, because there are going to be so few places where these can be placed, given the fact you have the distance separation from gaming, from children, from churches, from synagogues, from parks, from residential. I mean, there are going to be very few places where these can be placed. And so it may be incumbent upon the dispensaries to have to rely on these independents for their customers. So
I don't disagree with any of that. I agree with Member Ullman. We have to be thinking about there's already a clause in the regulations where the price of product will be reviewed by the Cannabis Compliance Board. But I do believe that we need to Member Ogden's point, we need to provide some incentives for current owners so that they stay competitive, and less than competitive, right? And I also believe that what Member Ullman said is we want to make them attractive. We want to, that's what we're here for, right? We're here to think through all the places where we can provide sustainability for our applicants. And I believe positioning them to be an attractive licensee is another place we can provide some unique form of sustainability without, to what you're saying, Member Ogden, without making it you giving them something, but also this.
It's got to be
It has to be symbiotic. We have to have some synergy there. So
because we see it already. We see it with why won't the cannabis industry help, nonprofit? Because they don't get a tax write-off. They don't. It does nothing for them outside of, feeling good.
So I'm agreeing with Member Ogden. I was just indicating that because they're going to be so rare, they will be attractive.
Agreed.
I think their rarity will make them attractive to dispensaries.
I think so too, but I also believe that there's a space for the licensees to raise the price and position them so that they can't win.
Yeah.
And that's what I don't want. So how do we look at incentives for the licensee to do business with the SE applicant? We can't mess with the taxes because the Cannabis Compliance Board doesn't have authority of that.
Well, what we can say, can we recommend that they take the taxes that they already collect and, for other things like programs and grant and support services for incentives and things like that throughout having their time and license, as a social equity. Because we talked about that last time, like how do we keep someone from wanting to switch this out or sell it and it's not a social equity license.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
So I know, because each jurisdiction and each body of regulation has their own authority, and the CCB doesn't have authority over taxes. However, they do have authority over licensing, and maybe one of the things that we could suggest is if you do business with a social equity applicant, you get 2 months extra on your license app. So instead of having to renew in February, you would renew in April or
What about a discount on your registration
I'm a little
fee?
concerned about again, I'm not the lawyer for the board, but I'm concerned about an equal protection issue with regard to that, because I think that if I'm a non-social equity applicant, they're already getting a break by having priority. Why are they now given, and again, I'm playing devil's advocate.
They're getting a break from how?
Because they get a priority because they're already social equity applicants. They already get priority application, that priority. So you're giving them more of an incentive by doing this. So again, I wish we had the lawyer on the line, but
you are the lawyer.
No, not for the thing I'm saying. But I'm just thinking that, just thinking about from a perspective of an equal protection claim that they may say, I'm not being provided with the same benefits.
But I think that's exactly what we're talking about.
Right.
If I'm saying to the licensee, if you do business with this social equity applicant and you build this relationship for however long it is, right? Then what we're willing to do to incentivize you, the owner, is, as Member Ogden has said, we're going to discount your licensing fees, just like we're discounting them. So then what it does is it positions that owner to say, keep this relationship solid.
Gotcha.
Yeah. This has value to us.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I mean, instead of paying $100,000 fee, maybe I can pay 90.
Right.
Because I showed over the years that I've supported this program.
Right.
And here's how, because it has to be measurable.
Yes, absolutely. So the original application is 100,000, but I think the renewal is only 10.
Right.
But what they could say is, because you're in relationship with the social equity applicant, your renewal is 5.
Right. And so what do you envision that relationship looking like? Not because, again, the customers that come in, since they can't buy it from the lounge, have to buy it from the dispensary.
Yes, they can buy it from the lounge. Member Scott, they can buy cannabis.
They should not, because they can't buy it from the lounge because the lounge isn't a dispensary.
Yes, no, they can buy it from the lounge.
Once the laws change.
Hold on. Member Ullman, go ahead.
Yes, so
Member Scott.
Just to clarify how the bill works is they are able to buy single serving use cannabis from the lounge, which would be coming from the dispensary, and they are not able to leave with the cannabis. So just like a bar, but yes, they can buy that in the form of a consumption or an edible. One thing that I was going to ask Chair Goins, I don't know this information if you do, but talking about the taxes from the cultivation to the dispensary and then the dispensary to the lounge, who makes that consideration for what percentage of tax should be? Is that the CCB? Is that us?
Well,
that's a Department of Taxation. And as a matter of fact, Justin Brosco, that was something that came up in legislation. The Department of Taxation actually came out and had a conversation about it. They are the source that channels that information. It is a collaboration between the CCB and the Department of Taxation because it has to all, kind of flow into whatever system they're using at this point. However, Department of Taxation always is the person who is setting tax.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So would we be able to recommend a tax to, for both of those transactions? So let's say it's 1%, but for social equity applicants, it's 0.5% to go, from the cultivator to the dispensary to the lounge. So I think that those taxes right there will determine quite a bit of what type of product and how much we can get it to the social equity lounges. But if we're talking about high tax for both of those transactions, that's worrisome.
I believe, so let me stay on task and then I'll answer that, okay? Because I believe the regulations say something different, but I want to go back to Member Scott. So Member Scott, the new regulations for the consumption lounge did create a designation that the words say that the consumption lounge may have sales. So words matter.
Yeah, and the problem with that becomes because these would be privileged licenses through the locals, I'm assuming, no one who's a social equity applicant, well, I shouldn't say that, depending on what their background is, they may not meet the qualifications for a privileged license given their background if they're able to sell. Because if you're able to sell the single servings, you're going to require the same background investigation as we would require for a dispensary owner.
The background.
And so they may not meet those qualifications is what I'm concerned about.
That's what we're all concerned about. Right. However, these applicants absolutely will have to meet the same background requirements as any other applicant. And that is the reason why that is the reason why from last week we said that there had to be a 10-year buffer, right, is because that puts them in the space where they should qualify as a regular applicant. Mm-hmm. Back to one of the things Member Allman was saying, and as it relates to the regulations, yes, there is a space where, what were we talking about? Taxes, right? Mm-hmm. So we absolutely can ask whatever, right? We can ask for whatever, but the regulations, if I remember correctly, the taxes will be applied on the end, not in the beginning. And the only reason why we're having this conversation is because if it is a delivery, then the sale will be completed. If the sale will be done at the dispensary, I vaguely almost remember that the regulation says that taxes will be applied at the end sale. So it won't be tax.
Mm-hmm. Good.
Okay.
Good.
So.
Yeah.
However, I do want to point out that it does say may sell. It doesn't say will. So that is at the discretion of the CCB. That is absolutely something we could put in as one of our recommendations, right, that we recommend that the social equity applicants have the ability to sell. I think that is definitely a component of sustainability. Mm-hmm. And so we can add that as one of our things.
Yeah. My concern was I don't know if you'll get the staff when they're considering these applicants to give a approval or at least a recommendation or approval, mm-hmm, if the person's got some issue in their background, because privileged licenses are very hard to get, and they should be because they are privileged licenses. So I'm just afraid that your people may be setting up for failure. I think the may maybe relate to the dispensary or the dispensary zoning it, but I don't know. I haven't read the legislation lately. But.
We're not setting anyone up for failure. Yeah. We're going to be very clear on what they need to know.
But just in terms of the buying from the dispensary or from the lounge, that's the part I'm concerned about, mm-hmm, just because it requires this privileged license. And again,
but they require single serving is what you're saying, though.
Just purchase, period.
Purchase single.
Right.
Oh, anything?
Yes, purchase, period. Yeah. But what I will say is, to Member Scott's point, this is a privileged license.
Yes.
Period.
Yes.
The requirements are the requirements are the requirements. The only thing that we are doing is we are trying to attract a specific applicant, right, but they will still have to meet the requirements, right, for a privileged license.
Okay.
Okay.
And that's a very invasive process in terms of the fact that it requires, where the sources of the money came, yes, from, where, name 10 people you knew from third grade.
Yes.
I don't think that's right.
Yes.
It requires quite a bit.
Yes, so. I absolutely am aware because, when I went through the process, they had the guy come to my church and talk to my pastor. So I absolutely know how invasive the process is, but it goes without saying. That's the process. Gotcha. That's not something that is up for negotiation. We're just trying to identify specific applicants that will meet and get through that process. Back to incentives to work with social equity applicants. I like that. So two things. We absolutely can make recommendation to Member Ullman. We can make recommendation for a percent. I just need to clarify what you're saying there, but I want to make sure that I kind of bring up what Member Ogden said as it relates to offering those persons working with social equity applicants, that member contract being so much, so many amount of years. If we're going to say that the social equity applicant is that social equity, is the SE partner with the CCB for however long that is, that this relationship is at least half that timeline. So if the SE license will be that licensee forever, then this person has to have a relationship with this person for this amount of time.
Or a person. I don't say, and the reason I say that is because let's say I'm doing business with you, I'm a social equity, you're a social equity lounge, but you're not good.
Right.
You're going to force me to be in a contract with that person for a year just to get as long as I'm doing business within that social equity realm,
Right.
Whether it be you, whoever, because let's face it, we're not trying to give people a leg up and be terrible.
Right.
It's not fair to the dispensary owners that want to do, but they should have to go down a level.
Right.
So as long as it's just any social equity.
And I agree with you, Member Ogden, is that we shouldn't probably go too in depth into the nuts and bolts of their agreement, as long as we just say there can be an agreement.
Yeah, an agreement, and then
let them work out the
throughout the
details.
year, how many ever.
But there does need to be a timeline. If you are working with a social equity applicant and you are working with that applicant, even if you get another applicant, there does need to be a timeline, because that's how you qualify for the incentive
or whatever. Yes.
And I would lean in to say that, and this is me really thinking about my SE applicants and that sustainability. You absolutely need to make that relationship work, because part of it not working has to do with mentorship. And so if you're going to lean in and be in partnership, you should help them make that work.
But I don't think it needs to be on the responsibility of a dispensary owner to mentor. It should be the state as well. I mean, look, there's programs in place. Why? Look, we have enough to contend with as a business owner in these times, and a dispensary that is super highly regulated and have a lot of compliance. There's a lot going on there. So the next thing I got to do is make sure your business is successful. I don't really think it should fall on the dispensaries to do that. But yet, hey, look, if they support programs, if they support the social equity, that's enough.
Right.
I mean, I don't know what you mean when you say mentor, but we got to get into that a little bit.
And Colorado Chair has like this accelerator program where they have like almost like a mentor, like Member Ogden was talking about, have somebody there to help them be successful, because even if you give someone a license and an opportunity to practice or to be in business, doesn't mean they're going to be successful.
Agreed.
Because they may not have any business acumen at all. So at least there needs to be somebody there to give them the education and the opportunity.
I mean, workforce development programs, apprentices programs, and all of that should be, other states do where it's within the state. They provide the funding for that and the programs. They put it together. I don't know of any dispensary running around helping, I can't get someone to go to feed the homeless right now.
Right.
So, I'm just saying.
You're right. They have their own business to contend with. They shouldn't have to be burdened with someone else's business program. So
if they're supporting, you can support. There's just different ways, I think.
So do we think that if that is one of the components that we want to look at, if you get in the partnership with an SE applicant and you maintain partnership with any SE applicant for a time of 2 years?
I think it should be year to year, because
I'm a little concerned about that. Yeah, I'm concerned
year to year.
And again, having them pinned to somebody for 2 full years. As a lot of businesses fail within the first 6 months or so. And so
I mean, I
I'm a
think
little
within
concerned
a year,
with having them.
A year.
I would say like
12 calendar
I was looking
months.
at, let's say, for example, though, I have a couple contracts. I mean, I don't even think it should be a full, because how am I going to be penalized If you close down and then you close down, I'm rushing. I got 1 month left in the year. I've been real good at support. Now I got to rush out and hurry up and cover my last month.
Yeah, that's what I'm concerned about, like us going too far into the private contractual relationship between the parties.
Mhm.
And again, I understand, Chair, that you're saying that at least they need to be held to some standard.
I agree.
But I don't know, 2 years is a long time.
It's a long time.
And again, I'm just again, it depends on the applicant and their business acumen, and if they're willing to listen to the dispensary person. Some people are just independent; they don't want to listen.
I got a
So
question.
how much time are we?
Can we do a time versus percentage of discount? Like, for example, let's say 80% of the year they worked with us. Can they get that? Can that be their
Yes.
incentive?
So you're thinking tiering
Yes,
it? Yes.
tiering it.
And what does work with mean? I mean,
You have to be in contract.
And
Okay.
so if, let's say I'm not that great, I'm a
right,
dispensary and I'm not keeping up with my relationships.
right.
I get, 1 month out of the year.
Mhm.
I need to get, that's about as good as should be able to get on a discount. Whatever little tiny fraction of percentage that might be.
Okay. So what you're saying is, I like that. So what you're saying is, for 3 months, you get 10%. For 4 or 5 months, you get this amount, and then so forth and so on. Tier it up.
Yeah, but I think the tier could be based on, it could be. already-
Minimum is 3 months.
I guess my concern is also that who's going to monitor this? I mean, what entity or organization is going to make sure that these two are getting along? That the lounge is doing what the
Do you have a
dispensary says?
contract?
Metric, if you got a contract, Metric will show all of that.
Well, and the
Because
tier,
the-
I mean,
Because yes, go ahead, Member Ullman.
Yeah. So when people are doing business, a lot of times they don't have contracts when they're buying the cannabis. And a lot of times, you could have a lot of flower and maybe you don't. So things go up and down. You have to find another supplier. There's so many different variables. So right now, I'd say most people do not do contracts with each other. And you want it to be a free market. We want these social equity applicants to have great offers, and maybe that mentorship program. I do think that's up to the dispensary on how they want to provide that. But if I'm in social equity winner and I know that dispensary A is going to help provide mentorship with compliance, accounting, and systems, and they write it down, and and dispensary B isn't going to do that, I might pick A, and that's just, off of the management agreement. So right now, nobody operates in contracts too much. So I don't think that's
she said it was
necessarily
written that way.
Yeah.
That's why the reason we were talking about it this way, though, is because she said it was written that way already.
Regulations are already like that. So although there aren't contracts, the regs are already written that there has to be a contract.
for the lounges. Now,
Does it say written, or can it be a handshake?
now dispensaries and whatnot, it's not in there. It's not in there like that.
Mhm.
That's why they haven't had to. But this is different. So that's why we're looking at it.
Yeah,
And we've already said that we don't need it to be where they are only in business with them. It's just,
Agreed.
it could be 100 of them. It
Yeah,
just
I
has
wonder
to be.
what the contract is supposed to entail, because we don't want to put any of these applicants in a position where now, let's say they're buying from a shop who's a vertical, and that, all of a sudden they don't have flour, and now
Yeah,
they're.
but we're not getting into the contract. That's between the companies. That's between the dispensary and then whatever they put in there. We just want to know that there is one, and it's for a certain length of time in order for everybody involved to get whatever discount we set or whatever incentive. That's it. Right?
I agree. Member Ogden, Member Ullman, I agree with you also. We don't want to get in the weeds of that. Supply and demand is going to be the key to that. However, we do want to incentivize those who have the supply to partner with those who will have the demand and make that attractive. And I think where we are right now is considering those partnerships and what it looks like as it relates to maybe a tiered system.
Mhm.
And I like the tiered idea. I think it's fair. I think the minimum should be 3 months. I mean, damn, you can't, any relationship, you got to get past 90 days. You know what I'm saying?
I mean, even if it's a month-to-month contract after the,
Yes,
you
agreed.
just show that you tried this for 3 months, and hey, that's where your initial incentive starts.
Agreed.
And then from there.
And I know as it relates to sales specifically, that will show up in metric. So we don't have to worry about how is the CCB going to be able to track that. It will be there because it'll be going from this dispensary to this lounge, and that will be in the metric system. So,
And can the percentage be, and not where we set the amount, but the percentage of time? Like, for example, out of 12 months, 3 months is what percent, so that's the
just percentage per
Yeah,
time.
because that way we don't have to monitor it that way. The math is what it is. So like, if you do it that way, if it's 1 month,
It's not one
now
month.
it won't be, because we'll have a minimum.
Right.
But let's say you do 4 months and someone does 4.5. There it is. You take that math out of a year, that's what your discount will be or whatever. And that's how they figure out what they pay in their next registration fee.
I like it. What do you think, Member Scott?
I think that's right on point. I like it.
I have a comment. I was reading Vermont gives $500,000 business development funds for social equity applicants. Definitely curious where they got that money from. I know in our original meeting, I had suggested that we increase the daily limit to 2 ounces or an ounce and 3.5 grams or of concentrate or 7 grams. And I would love to see that additional money going for social equity applicants. But I think, possibly something to be said if you are a current dispensary, cultivation, or production, and you are able to possibly make a donation or create some kind of grant where they could apply. Do you get a benefit for that?
Not
That's
right now.
pay to play.
And that's another thing, is like, there's still some things that have to, once it's rescheduled and things like that happen, it may help a lot of this, because you can't do, right now it's not structured for dispensaries to give anything and get anything back. We'd have to restructure tax stuff, like she said earlier.
Right.
We try to
That's
move
what I'm
this forward with
saying,
something
like-
as simple as these fees or something, other incentives that we can recommend for programming. Right now, what they haven't structured is they have taxes they take and they use that for programs throughout where they deem necessary. We can recommend that some of this money that they already pull from the taxes go to these programs, not something new though, like creating a whole new tax, a whole new.
No, that's not what I'm
system.
saying. That's not saying create a new tax. Increase the daily limit. That's one, to get more taxes in and then have those going to fund for actual reform and social justice. But if dispensaries actually any cannabis company, not just dispensaries, was able to give a grant or a scholarship. I don't see it as pay to play. I see it as there was never, a revolving loan fund set up and no thought process of how we're going to get tax dollars to social justice. So if you are a cannabis company and you can donate 5 $250,000 scholarships, is there something that you could benefit? Just an idea, might not work. But again, I saw Vermont and, I don't know where they're getting that money from, but $500,000 is definitely a way to start the business strong. My computer's frozen. Screen.
I think there's a problem with the connection. We'll get them reconnected.
Okay.
Thanks for your patience, member. We're still trying to get them reconnected.
Thank you.
Okay, you're reconnected.
Oh, great. Member Ullman, can you hear us?
I can hear you.
Okay, we stopped, you didn't miss anything. But I wanted to take us back to, we were talking about funding and social equity applicant programs. And so without reviewing everything that I said, what we were going to do is make a suggestion that a component of the licensing fees for social equity applicants, for the consumption lounges, let me be very clear, a portion of the social equity applicant fees go use lounges, go back to the SE applicants for programming. So that is money that hasn't been allocated yet. We can say we'd like, as you said, 1%. I don't think that's enough. I'd have to do the math on that. We'd like 5% of the total licensing fees to go back to an SE program. We could make that suggestion.
I would suggest a minimum and then let them go up.
A minimum of 5%.
Because that way, we don't know how much is going to come in, and then we might go, dang, we should have said 10, and we don't,
So want to say minimum of 5%?
Words matter, remember, Scott?
Yeah, that's it. That's the chair's comment. I agree with it. I agree. And Chair, I was saying that I also think that if we're going to be able to make suggestions as to where this money goes, I'd like to see some type of education.
Sure.
Colorado has a really, when we visited Colorado, they have an education back to starting at 6th grade to talk about marijuana and the effects and everything else like that. They even have a game that they created, almost like a quiz game.
Well, some of this stuff here, I think the education needs to be focused on sustainability of their business, because this is very specific to social equity applicants and what they're getting in order to. So I agree with that is needed,
yes.
And I think they should use that money in the whole totality of the tax and break that off.
Yeah, for some type of
social
education.
equity here, I think the incentive for people being a social equity applicant and maintaining that throughout time is some of the programs that I'm talking about, is like workplace development, apprenticeship programs, things of that nature, and that are going to help them with the business going forward in order. And then, maybe even allowing people who, as another incentive for someone who works closely with social equity companies, allowing those to maybe participate in some of those programs for their business. That's another incentive.
Yep.
If I support social equity applicants throughout my year, then I can send 2 or 3 of my whatever number of my employees to learn some workplace development as well.
Great.
So those type of programs are some of the stuff that I think we should encourage them to put in place.
I agree. So we'll make the suggestion for a minimum of 5% to go of the consumption lounge fees, licensing application fees. I need to write that.
And Chair, was there any, I guess, thought as to how much that would actually be, or we don't, that's not our realm, so I guess we don't worry about that.
It depends on how many applicants there are and
Okay.
All of that.
all of that.
So that's not our lane.
No.
So we don't need to bid that. Okay.
No.
Okay.
I mean, if I had to estimate, let's see, I know the numbers were, we had, the Cannabis Compliance Board had received 49 inquiries for retail consumption lounge. So that's 400,000. Wait, no, because it's 100,000
Right.
per person. So
Oh, so it is 100. Oh,
It-
but
it's
the
a
SEs are
dispensary
going to be
owner
different.
already.
SEs will be lower.
yeah, so that's half a
Okay.
million
Thank you so
right
much.
there, right? So,
Thank you.
so there, there's some money there.
So some of the other programs that I think
Thank
that
you.
if we,
Thank
like you
you.
said, generalize, here's some of the things that I think that money should be looked at and they, is that okay to go into now or?
No, it is not okay. It is not okay to go into that.
Okay.
But we have identified a investor and current owner incentive. And so with that, we'll move on to item 4, which is diversity consideration. And so I just want to point out that the consumption lounge specifically, there are 10 applications available. And because of what we are suggesting as a requirement, I believe that we will have women, veterans, and LGBTQIA+ persons that will apply. However, I want to have the conversation about these 3 criterias and this, I'm trying my hardest not to do the as a Black woman thing, right? But I'm a Black woman. It goes without saying. So one of the things that I'm always thinking about when I am looking at the iniquities of persons disenfranchised by the past cannabis policies is who those persons usually are, right? The people I talk to, men and women, I am thinking about that person particularly. When we start talking about women, veterans, LGBTQIA+, as we go into the equity applicant component, I find that most places move away from those disenfranchised persons by the war on drugs and move into something that is a little more comfortable fit as it relates to diversity. And so my concern with that is when we are talking about social equity applicants, we're always talking about that person who was disenfranchised and now there is a business that is flourishing and making money off of those persons and their lives and their livelihoods and their generations of trauma. And so I want to give that as we're moving into this conversation, I want to just kind of give that as a disclaimer and then talk about diversity considerations as a tiered idea. So as we're talking about this as a tiered idea and we're thinking about women outside of what we've already identified, how do we want to qualify women? Because what I know to be true, this isn't, something that I heard. I know to be true, there are businesses that identify as women owned and the husbands run the businesses. So that is what I'm always thinking about when I'm thinking about women in the business work, owning businesses. And so with that being said, when we're considering women, how do we want to qualify them as an SE applicant? I have nothing to add to this, so I'm leaning on you all.
Wouldn't it be right now when someone has to apply for a woman-owned or minority-owned business, there's already criteria for that. Are you saying you don't want to, because of what you've experienced, you don't really want to go with strictly that criteria? Because it's very intense to do that.
We can. We absolutely.
I don't know why we would alter it. I mean, it's been
Okay.
going on, they structured this already.
We can do that. We can just use the criteria, but my question is, how are we considering them in the application process?
Well, Chair, this is almost like when we had the discussion about how much should the SAE person or SEA person own. We're talking about the 51%. And so we almost get back into that conversation as to the person may need the woman may need a partner involved, or there may be several women involved, or again, I don't know what the current criteria indicates what's considered to be a woman-owned business. We probably need to look at that and mimic that, like I was saying.
I think that is, as Member Ogden has said, that has already been qualified. So we don't need to.
Right.
We don't need to converse that.
Right.
What we need to be talking about is, how does this stack? How do these persons stack next to our SE applicants?
Do they also, you're saying, like, basically with this person, just because it's a minority woman owned business, she automatically is an SE applicant, period. None of the other stuff needs to apply.
That's what I'm asking.
And there could be people that meet all three of those.
Right, which they would already meet it.
Right. I mean, so
Right.
maybe they could be all three of them. So
Right.
that's a little harder, I think.
I kind of understood it as there's almost three buckets, if you will. There's social equity applicants, which we've established have been adversely affected by nonviolent cannabis policy. And we know that's going to be, a small narrowed down. Then there's the diversity applicants, which maybe never were affected by cannabis policy, but were left out of the first two license rounds when Nevada became legal. And then there's just everyone else, which probably means you're super rich and you're going to apply for the independent lounges. So for this group of diversity applicants, which I foresee as a large group of people, I think it's important that we differentiate. They're not social equity applicants. They're diversity applicants, meaning they've been left out. And I think with that is you do have to establish some monetary metrics, because you don't want a veteran, a woman, a minority-owned woman, somebody that was a caregiver, that's a millionaire, getting this license. They can go apply for the independent license. So I do think in this case with diversity, we put a criteria for income.
Well, we know the social equity applicants are their first, piece is financial, some of it to some degree, right? Because we all know that there's certain criteria to be that, and a lot of it is underserved areas, XYZ, which means you most likely need the support of financial support. So the discounts on fees make sense there, things like that, where they wouldn't for this applicant, because you don't, like you said, to your point, it doesn't necessarily mean they're financially struggling. So that, I think there's already a separation there if they don't get the discount with the fees and things at the upfront piece.
This one's a little bit more difficult, just because it's hard to do. And I know the second gentleman who spoke during public comment referenced Illinois and their veterans programs. I need to look at that and see what that program.
Well, they just had veterans. I'm familiar with that.
Okay.
They just got extra point for having a veteran on their application.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and a lot of people did, and a lot of people tied.
Gotcha.
And so, and even if you tied, didn't mean you got, because there's a lot of people
and the tie didn't go to the veteran?
No, it went, they just had a veteran on their application.
Oh, gotcha.
That was
that was a couple points or whatever.
Yeah, it was like 2 points, I believe.
Yeah, this is a harder call.
5 points.
The other,
some small amount of points, but it mattered.
So one of my concerns is the SC applications. There are 10 of them for this particular licensing process. And we're talking about the consumption lounge process. There are only 10 applications. And so what we are proposing is there may be a tiered process where these identifying markers take precedence, and then these identifying markers take secondary, or they're equal across the board and there's some kind of pass fail that happens, or
Yeah, I agree with Member Ullman when she talked about the fact that this is for diversity, equity, and inclusion for those persons who were adversely affected by past policies. If these groups can identify as that,
Then they would already be here.
then they would already be here. Yeah.
Right.
And so that's why I'm a little concerned about us getting into this realm.
Me too.
So I'm a little concerned about us getting involved in this realm when the first part is what we're charged with doing. So.
Well, we're trying to do both, right? So the whole point is that if people did not have an opportunity to get into this market, they do now. I'm looking at New York. I'm looking at New York's language here on that email you sent over. And I think they've done a great job at identifying those diversity applicants. So again, people who aren't millionaires, but people who didn't get a charge. So minority-owned business, women-owned business, minority women. They put disenfranchised farmers, I would say caregivers, licensed caregivers, and then veterans. And that's why I'm saying, like, if you meet one of those categories, but you're rich, you're not going to be in the diversity and social equity pool. You'll be in the independent pool. But let's say you meet one of those categories and you make less than $250,000 a year, you're a diversity applicant. You did not get a chance to get in. And that's what we have to do.
Yeah, but I also think that to what you're saying, Member Ullman, which is what me and Member Scott are saying, is that is the reason why we set up the SC applicant tiers, right? So if you're not a person from a nonviolent, then you live in an area for 5 years that has been is in a poverty level, is it, you could be a woman or a veteran or an LGBTQI that would live in that area. Another criteria would be.
But that's a social equity applicant. We're talking about diversity applicants. So who are
but there are no diversity. So just so that we're all clear, because I want to make sure that we are comparing apples to apples. There are only SE applications available, only SE licenses available. So what we are considering now.
Deciding, Aisha, that's what we're deciding, or we're recommending, because again, this is a social equity, diversity, and inclusion. So what we don't want to do is disclude or not include all of the people that either in the middle, right? You're not rich and you don't have a charge. That's a lot of people we would be excluding.
I'm going to lean in a little differently because the regulations call them social equity applicants. They don't call them diversity applicants.
Yeah.
And they have to be, even though you may be diverse or not, you have to be adversely affected.
We are recommending regulations right now.
But
for a consumption lounge.
Right.
But you have to show that you're adversely affected. So how do you show that you're adversely affected if you're one of these groups? So you think veterans were adversely affected?
No,
as a result?
That's why they would be considered the diversity applicant, right? But if
Member Ullman,
it has to be both.
Sure.
Member Ullman, I hear exactly what you're saying, and I will agree with you that there is a distinction between social equity applicant and diversity applicant. I absolutely agree with that. The unfortunate part is we are specifically talking about consumption lounges right now.
Yes,
and the consumption lounges identify social equity applicants and that there are licenses available for social equity licenses. It doesn't say diversity.
Well, I definitely disagree on how the bill reads. That's why we're having this subcommittee. But where would you say those diversity applicants, so all the Black and brown folks who don't have a charge, where do they fit? I
didn't say that only Black and brown people have charges.
Right.
That's saying that only
applicant, right? So people who don't have a charge and who aren't millionaires, that's a diversity applicant. So if you were
Section 9 doesn't have the word diversity in it.
No, it does not.
Section 9 says adversely affected by provisions of previous laws which criminalized activity relating to cannabis, as determined by the board in accordance with the regulations adopted.
Absolutely.
So diversity isn't even in that section 9.
It is not.
So why are we talking about it?
That's what we were talking about. That's what we were asking.
So
Why are we talking about it? Because
all
it's
those
not in the
people that
charge.
don't have a charge? So all those people that don't have a charge and aren't millionaires are not included?
Again, if they're not referenced in section 9, if they weren't adversely affected by previous laws which criminalize this activity.
The reason why I am bringing it up is because, to your comment, we absolutely are a diversity, equity, and inclusion subcommittee. And so I want to make sure that I am giving space for a dialogue. I'm not the ruler, I'm just the chair. And so if there is a space where the members believe that these persons should have the same relevance as SE applicants, I want to offer that conversation. I specifically said, I have nothing to offer in regards to this. However, I absolutely want to offer the opportunities for the committee to weigh in if they feel differently.
Yeah, so it's either we put them in the SE piece or we don't.
Facts.
Either we put them in there or we don't. Either we slide them in there and we give them, but they fall in the same, category and they have to meet the same qualifications, or they don't. That's it. Really, I
we
think
obviously heard from public comment from caregivers, and that's another variable with which we've also seen from some other states that have put caregivers in this, but maybe they were never charged. Where my question would be, where do those people fall?
Again, we are talking about specific how the regulations are written up. This isn't a decision I'm making. This is a decision that was made from some legislators, and the language says social equity applicants. Now, you absolutely can make a suggestion that you want caregivers to be considered in the social equity applicant component. We can have that space to put that, but right now, what we're talking about is women, veterans, LGBTQIA. Do we want to add them in the SE component of this conversation?
Yes.
Disabled veterans, have typically been added. I think that's important.
Agreed.
Especially if because there is a process to verify disabled veterans.
But again, if we're in section 9, and words have meaning, if we're going to read section 9, they have to have been adversely affected by provisions of previous laws which criminalize cannabis activity. So if they don't fit within that section 9, we're stepping outside of our lane.
Okay, that's a good point.
I think some of those persons will be women, veterans, and LGBTQIA. So I just think that if we stick with our lane, they're just not going to get any incentive for it.
They're not going to get any extra points for that. Right. That's what we're determining, basically, at this point.
And I'm okay with that because then it makes it. Because one of the things we have seen nationwide is those extra points where people are being sued. Right? If we make it black and white and transparent, you either fit or you don't fit, then you fit or you don't fit. I
think section 12 refers to diversity. Member Scott, if you have that available.
But we're only on 9, but I thought we were only dealing with 9, not 12.
Well, we're dealing with the whole bill. But
I don't think that's our charge. Again, I don't know. So are you saying that, Member Ullman, are you saying that you're going to give extra points
for
these things?
I'm not saying that.
So what are you saying?
Do you think it should be tiered? Because we have to make a suggestion. So let's make a suggestion. Based on your passion, I want to make a suggestion. What would be a suggestion on how we weigh women, veterans, and LGBTQIA plus?
Yes, and minority owned that doesn't have a charge. That is the other folks we're talking about. So
how do we?
Sorry.
Yes, go ahead.
So if this is a lottery, you could have multiple entries where social equity applicants have the most entries into the lottery. Then you have, based on merit, Then you have a system. So let's say you are a Nevada resident, minority, female, veteran. That would get you a lot of entries.
I mean, yeah. Well,
So kind of
We established earlier that we wouldn't have stacking. That sounds like stacking.
No,
So let's
not
kind of
stacking.
stay.
It's not stacking. It is, the lottery already is, the lottery already is just a crapshoot to if you get it or not. But if you've been disenfranchised, you should have more opportunities to get like a merit-based system, but in a lottery sense. So you'll have the most balls in the lottery. If you are, again, a minority, women, veteran, you'll have the most. So that's how I see you could definitely get a better chance of winning the lottery if you've had more issues or, you know, more injustice or left out.
I mean, some people would argue with that. I mean, how you went to jail and I'm a woman as a veteran. I'm going to argue with you on who was the most distant.
Right.
I mean, I'm just saying that's leaving the door open.
Right. And again, women and veterans are easy to prove. How do you qualify the LGBTQIA?
Exactly. I was going to ask.
What I mean, how personal do you get with that question?
Yeah, because how can that be verified?
I mean, that's the problem. I think in the beginning, you talked about quantifiable, measurable criteria. And I just think we're getting way too personal if they're going to have to start, you know.
Exactly.
So.
And anyone could, you know, not for nothing, but, you know, you can make that up really if you wanted to.
LGBTQ you can make up, but you know if somebody is, what gender they are, what race they are, if they've served in the military.
No, you don't know that. You don't know what someone's sex preference is. You know, that's the very
I said what gender they are. So we know somebody if
they identify with.
So
yeah,
let's talk about women and veterans. Okay, so we absolutely can identify women in how you have to qualify as a woman-owned business. So if we consider women as an applicant, how do we want to have that woman-owned business qualify? If we put them in this pool, how do they have to qualify? I would definitely say they need to be a 5-year resident. That should be consistent.
Well, I think in their application process for minority-owned business, women business-owned, there is a requirement already for how long you've had that business and locally. So that already has a measurement of time and things attached to it. But
on top of that,
we talked about last time that this is going to be a scoring system, right? Mm-hmm. We don't determine that because we don't know all the different things that are happening in the application. Would it be open for suggestion that women and veterans get an additional whatever points as opposed to not a score variance, just they just get it or yes or no,
that's
5 or no.
That's points. I mean,
it is
so if you're a woman veteran who was in jail for cannabis,
the other ones don't get a point. It's just a check off. Like for social equity, you either yes or either you are or you aren't. And then if you are determined to be that, then you get discount on this, you know, you get the incentives.
I think
but there's nothing that we have in the point system for that I recall that we talked about. Mm-hmm. It's just a yes or no. Now, women and veterans, you can suggest a point. They automatic, like in some states in Chicago and Illinois, that's what they did. They you got 5 points here, you got 2 points for being a veteran.
And so was the veteran status something that you could, you would give additional points depending on how long you were in?
No,
or
just that you
were active duty in a just veteran,
flat,
that's it.
Disabled veteran.
Well, what would those points get you if it's a lottery? That's why I was kind of saying the points would be like more balls in the lottery.
But we're not talking about lottery.
Yeah.
We haven't talked about that on this floor at all.
But you're saying
we have not talked about lottery in this committee at all.
Okay. Well, I'm talking about it because I'm not understanding the differences in like getting more points, which is a merit-based system.
Right.
But we're not doing a merit-based system.
Well, we've talked about it, Pat. So we haven't talked about how the Cannabis Compliance Board will choose the applicants. We've only talked about pass and fail as it relates to identifying qualified applicants.
Social equity.
Okay, I have an idea. So Kima, kind of spinning off to what you said. So let's say based on points would determine if you're either in the social equity diversity pool or you're in the independent pool. And let's say
not points on that, but because
but I'm not understanding where we're getting these two tools from. Again, we're only charged with the social equity applicant.
Well,
now we're doing social equity diversity applicants as well.
No, we're just determining whether to add women and veterans to the.
Well, I don't see diversity in here. That's what I'm saying. I don't see it in here.
That's why I was telling you to look at section 12.
So what does it say in section 12? Let's read it. What does it say? Because I don't remember.
Remember, Alvin, why don't you read the part you're talking about, because I don't see it. But again, I'm just glancing at it. But what do you see about some of diversity?
So just saying on the base of race, ethnicity, or gender.
What section are you referring to?
Section 12.
Well,
and
I'm
reading this off my phone, but so 12.4, the criteria of merit established pursuit to sub 1 for proposed independent lounges. So again, just to reiterate, like right now we are talking about pass fail, but this diversity applicant could be where before they are put into a bucket, we look at them, and if it's over so many points, right, then they go into that social equity bucket. If it's under, it's like, no, sorry, you haven't had very many hardships and you actually weren't left out of the first round. But again, just finding a solution to where do those people fit? Minorities, women, veterans, caregivers, where do they fit in these two places?
So here's what I will say. I did hear you, Member Ullman, and I'm reading section 12. Thank you. And what I want to point out is there is a diversity clause, race, ethnicity, or gender of the applicant. However, clause 1 and clause 2, section 12, subsection 4, number 2. But so I just want to, I love regulations. My mentor taught me that the devil's in the details. And so I love to read. And I want to just point out that the way this reads is that there are two qualifying. One is a social equity applicant. One is a diversity. And what we could say in this conversation is the diversity person would go to the other applications and not the 10 that would be set aside for SEs. The way this reads, we don't have to consider diversity with the SE. And this is, again, what the other thing about legislation is always up for interpretation. It's I always say it's like the Bible, because people say, how can you read this and understand it? Well, I was raised reading the Bible, so I was interpreting that too. So someone else can interpret this different. The way I'm interpreting it right now is the criteria of merit established pursuant to these subsections without limitations for proposed independent cannabis consumption lounge. 1, the diversity on the basis of race, ethnicity, or gender of the applicant or the persons who are proposed to be owners or officers of the proposed independent cannabis consumption lounge, which means an independent lounge. 2, whether the applicant qualifies as a social equity applicant, and social equity applicants have licenses set aside specifically for them. Okay. So I could separate the two. I'm not obligated in this subcommittee to say that they have to be one, but we can.
I think that's a better idea anyway, because that's what it is in the regular.
Understand, you only have 10 for the entire state.
Agreed.
For the entire state.
Thank
you.
So, I mean, I don't know how much detail you're going to get into.
Thank you very much.
To qualify people for this lounges. So that's the thing we have to remember. You have 10.
Can we recommend, like you just said, separating women and veterans into the regular tier?
Absolutely.
And saying that they get special consideration in the point system, and they can determine that point system, whether it be a lottery or a point system.
But they also must be adversely affected.
Well, no, what we're talking about
separate.
Okay, separate.
And so as long as it's minority women owned,
yes,
and they have a process, disabled vets, they have a process.
Yes.
And If they qualify for those two, they get special consideration and their scoring process, whichever that is, because it may be scoring, maybe not. And the CCB can determine that process because that's what they're going to do.
Yes,
And we just recommend that they get consideration in the diversity piece.
I absolutely agree.
But not the other category.
No, so taking those 10 and talking about the 10 independents.
Yeah.
I absolutely believe that we should make recommendations that women, veteran, and LGBTQIA plus have preference or first pool or, whatever that language.
Personally.
First two?
Yeah, because I don't know how, unless somebody can tell me right now or we talk about, I just don't know how you can, there's not a process to verify LGBTQIA.
And so, Chair, let me get this straight. So
Maybe they're not
in what
included.
category?
Maybe the
What?
LGBTQA are not included in the diversity.
That's what I'm saying.
And
that's what I'm saying,
It can be subjective. But when it comes to minorities, women, veteran, and caregivers, if they make, and I say $250,000, even though you're not considered rich if you make over that compared to this, how many applicants will have in the independent lounges that are rich. So now these people that are diversity applicants have to go in this pool with, tons and tons of other people. So my suggestion would be is if we have these diversity applicants and we are able to rank them, and if you have certain scores that are higher, you would go into the social equity pool. So again, let's say you're a minority, women, veteran, and you make less than $250,000. You are not comparable to a rich white man who got all the licenses. So now you're going to be in the pool with them. Now, let's say you're just a woman and that's all you got going for you. Well, you might be in the independent pool because you really haven't had too much hardship. So we could be.
Well, you get special consideration. You get special consideration.
That's why this is so difficult because it's like, when you talk about, how do you measure someone's hardship? I mean, how do you measure her hardship versus your hardship versus her hardship?
You keep saying, you keep going back to this hardship.
That's why,
Member Scott, I can answer that for you.
I hate to harken back to the original dispensaries and everything else, this whole system they tried. It has to be measurable and quantifiable. You can't just make these things up, and you can't just give some kind of subjective criteria that can't be measured because you're going to get sued. I'm not saying
you can't measure. You can measure if somebody was what race they are. You can measure someone's gender. You can measure if they're a veteran, and you could confirm if they were a caregiver. My recommendation for an idea is that if you did not get an opportunity to get a license, and that we know who is, right? We know who got licensed and who didn't. Where do those people fall? And if they've had meet certain criteria that we would establish, then they might fall under the social equity applicant.
But I guess you should, from my perspective, I saw the applications for the people who didn't get the licenses. They were just as rich as the people who did get the licenses. So I don't know if you can use that criteria because the state made the criteria. You had to have $250,000 in cash. So I don't know how many people have.
You just keep it clean.
So I just think we have to get out of this realm of trying to do. We're charged with a certain charge. And you're trying to put too much into one small bag. And so
I disagree. I disagree. I think if we put all these other people into the individual lounge, if we put all these
for the entire state of Nevada.
Wait, Member Scott.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Member Ullman.
If we put all the diversity applicants into the independent lounge bucket, they are now competing with tons more applicants.
Yeah, but they get special consideration. We are giving them something for being that. They're not just going in and that's it.
I don't think she heard that. So, Member Ullman, what Member Ogden is suggesting is that for women and veterans, and you said caregivers, I have that written down.
And minorities.
That they.
Well, yes.
Okay.
Because minority-owned businesses.
Yeah, because there's more minorities than disenfranchised. And minority business owners, qualified minority business owners, that's fine. That they're given some special treatment or special preference.
Consideration.
So what we need to decide is, what does that look like, right? In the independent application process. So now we need to discuss what we want that to look like so that these applicants weigh heavier in the independent licensing versus just everyone else.
Yeah.
So how do we want that to look? Maybe this is a scenario where, maybe this is a scenario where, to what she has said regarding a lottery, maybe this is a place where we can say these persons get more entries in the independent application versus, that would leave the CCB to get sued for sure.
Well,
how do we have this?
Aren't they determining, that's what I mentioned earlier, though, they're determining the process of scoring, either whether it be.
Oh, yeah, because even after that, they have to score.
Right, so either it's going to be score or it's going to be lottery. Our recommendation is that the X group, this group and this group, or whichever groups we determine are in the diversity piece, they get special consideration in the scoring or lottery process, whichever they decide. And keeping it that clean, because we don't know enough information about that process because it hasn't been determined yet.
Right, exactly. We can
So
make
if we just decide what groups that is, they'll get that special consideration. In the regular licensing, the independent licenses, that's where they get it. And they don't fall into a social equity piece or any of that, it's separate. And that's that.
Like, what kind of special consideration? I mean,
once again, that depends on their scoring, how they're going to score. We don't have to get that detailed unless we do. But from what I understand is we just make that recommendation when they're going to score it or they're going to do either they're going to score or they're going to do a lottery. We don't know yet. But we absolutely, Member Ullman, if you are suggesting an amount of preference, let's hear. I think there's just too many unknowns to make a suggestion.
That's not arbitrary and capricious.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. I don't think we should.
I think we definitely, so special preference could look like, what we could say is left to the discretion of the CCB. So what we could say is these diversity applicants, which would be women, veterans, caregivers, and minority qualified business owners, should be given special preference that left up to the CCB.
And I'm going to challenge the caregivers because I think that's really broad, but it's up to you.
Well, you could have to have a caregiver license.
Correct.
Right, but
correct. You would have to be following the state.
It depends how you define caregiver. If I cared for my mother when she was ill.
No,
you
have to be registered with the state.
Yes. So there is a caregiver license that is like a medical marijuana license. And what she is saying is, if you are a caregiver, you also should give preference. What I will say is a caregiver needs to be quantified. So let's say you've been a caregiver for 3 years.
But why would a and just for me, because I don't know, why would a caregiver need this special consideration? Because
what we're saying is this caregiver has been in the space where they have grown and supplied product for an ill person and which makes them an important piece of the cannabis industry itself. And I'll agree with that because I do come from the cannabis industry and I know that there are caregivers who really, they have helped and been in a space where they have consistently been a part of this marketplace and kept the medical component of it.
Wouldn't a bartender be that same person?
No, not even.
No, I'm not saying literally, but that someone could argue.
No, I'm arguing it. No, the person who is a caregiver has a medical marijuana caregiver's license.
I know.
It is a specific thing.
But they might do it because, like, once again, that might be your mom. You got one to go get her stuff because she can't get to it.
They're part of the legacy market is really how we have to look at them, right? And we were able
That's
to.
not how I would look at them, but that gets into a little.
Caregivers.
Again, I can't agree with this line of it's up to the majority, but I just don't agree with this line because I just think you're going too far afield of your charge.
I think, I agree.
We have a lot of people, and we just heard from two gentlemen on our public comment.
I understand that, but that's not what you're charging.
We gotta stop
Let her talk, Member Scott, yeah.
Well, I hadn't been talking either, Chair.
Yeah, my apologies.
So she interrupted me, so.
My apologies, my apologies.
I kind of agree with him though.
Hold on, Member Ogden. Member Scott first, then Member Ullman. My apologies.
I was just gonna say to Chair, we're just too far afield of where we're going. I mean, I understand what Member Ullman is saying, and I understand what, I don't know exactly where we're going with what she's doing, but I just think you have one charge, and I'm looking at the Colorado information about social equity licenses. They don't talk about any of that stuff in this. And this has been a proven system that's worked for quite a while. So again, instead of us reinventing the wheel like we did with the smoking ordinance and all the other stuff, the Indoor Air Act and all the other, why don't we get something that's a proven system and follow it rather than trying to go so far?
I'm gonna comment on that, but go ahead, Member Ullman.
Yes, Member Scott, my point being here is that the folks that are were caregivers providing cannabis to patients in the traditional market should be considered. And we were able to hear from two of those folks, and there's probably a lot that are following, that have been servicing the cannabis community, did not have an opportunity to get a license. And those, I mean, you might not know those folks, but they feel they were left out. And for those folks who followed the rules, were a licensed caregiver, we're doing it right by the state, we should absolutely consider them. And I will just notate that Michigan actually considered them. So we're not getting off topic. These are things that, variables that other states have actually put into their regulations.
I'm going to agree with Member Ullman, but I also want to point out that Member Scott, Colorado's social equity program isn't even 2 years old. They wouldn't be one of the ones that I would say is tried and true. However, some of this qualifying conversation is consistent across some of the other states. And so that is what makes the conversation relevant. We're going to make the recommendation. Again, this is not the end all. The chain of command is the subcommittee makes recommendations to the CAC. The CAC makes recommendations to the Cannabis Compliance Board. So, ultimately, I'm going to put it here as something that we need to vote on if we're going to send that to the CAC, and we will be doing that on next week. So, do we have anything else that we want to add for diversity? To be given special preference for licensings in the independent lounges?
I would just say we put, some kind of cap on how much income they can make per year. So that way you're not, if you meet, minority women, veteran, caregiver, but you're rich, you're not in that category.
But if you go off of the minority business owner application, there's a certain amount of money you have to make on that. Same thing, you have to qualify for that. Your business has had to do. So it's a kind of a contradiction if you look at it that way, because you still have to be somewhat proven successful to be considered minority business owned, that designation. It's sustainable. So all I'm saying is, if you're going to put a cap, you may want to look into some, to what that, so there's no contradiction there, what's required on those applications.
So what I'll do next meeting is bring in the designation so that we can take a look at it and see if we all agree. And also, veteran status can absolutely be verified. You're either a veteran or you're not. So, that's
right. There's a process.
Yes, that's not
just a clarifying question.
Yes.
So the cap would be how much money you can make from the lounges, or how much money you make in order to apply.
Your annual income.
I think it needs to match whatever the application is, but she'll see when it comes in.
Yeah, I'm going to bring in what the qualifications are, and we will look at it. But what Member Ullman, I believe what Member Ullman was saying is she was thinking along the lines of just because you're a women-owned business, that doesn't mean that you should be able to qualify for special preference if you're making over a certain amount of money, right? Because I know women-owned businesses who are $1 million earners, and they are, they are qualified women-owned businesses. That doesn't mean that you should be able to be an applicant, is what she's saying.
Yes, correct.
I have to go back with what, when I reviewed the YouTube video and Member Ogden was talking about successful and sustainable.
Right.
You have to understand that some of this involves a certain modicum of success. And if you want people that have the business acumen that can make these work, you're going to have to be a little bit lenient with regard to that, because you don't want somebody who's making zero money trying to start a business, you know what I mean? And you want them to be sustainable and successful. And I think you have to, again, I don't know, I'll wait for you to see the figures that you're coming up with, but you can't have somebody that's broke running a business.
That's why they have it kind of already mapped out on what they do on that application, because you do have to have a level of success.
You do.
And you shouldn't punish someone, because it's more than just the money. When you're a minority-owned business, sometimes you don't get the contracts because of racism and things. Like there's other barriers, So I probably won't agree with whatever that cap is on this piece, but because I will go off of whatever that application probably says more than likely, but I'm open to it.
Just to clarify again, my idea for the cap was putting in a income for what that person made per year. So if you make over whatever we decide, you are in the independent license lounge, or you are in the independent category. If you make under a certain amount, and you can still be successful and know how to run a business and make under $200,000 a year. So that does not mean that you can't own a business. I'm just saying, if you are making under a certain amount, you could fall into the diversity category because you are not wealthy. I hope that's clear.
Yes, that is clear. And thank you, Member Ullman. We have reached the end of item 4. We're moving into item 5. And my disclaimer for item 5 really is we have one more meeting, which is the 18th. I don't have the time. However, in that meeting, we will absolutely be looking at the things that we have discussed. We will decide which way we want to go, if we want to leave that on the floor or if we're going to move that to the CAC as a whole to vote on, to be suggested to the Cannabis Compliance Board. So our next meeting, because we are on a timeline, I know that the CCB really wants these requirements soon, so we have to push through so that the next meeting that they're ready to go. So be looking for an agenda that'll be posted on the Cannabis Compliance Board's, the CCB website, on what the next discussions will be and what will be available. I'm gonna make sure that we have as much documentation as we have. Sarah and I really appreciate her consistency and her holding me accountable and being a great teammate for this subcommittee. She's gone above and beyond, including doing the work herself. And anytime you have a person that is engaged in a process like this, you're winning. And so I really do feel like a winner having her on my team, and I truly appreciate her. With that being said, we are leaving. Yes.
So the next meeting, we'll have a listing of everything that we kind of discussed in the last 2 meetings. Well, 3 meetings for you guys, but 2 for me.
Yes.
And then we can kind of go through those. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
And so the first meeting, the meeting that, well, you did watch it.
Yeah, I did watch it. Yeah.
It was really just a conversation, right? Yeah. So only the things that we will be voting on, you were a part of.
Okay.
So nothing is outside of that. Okay. But yes, on the agenda, it will itemize between Sarah and I. We're gonna structure it out. It will itemize where we are and then what we'll be voting on, so everyone will know what's going on, because transparency is really where the CCB wants to be. and the CAC wants to mirror that. So yes, that is where we're headed. Any other comments? Member Ogden?
Thank you, Member Scott, for your research. That was great and very helpful. Got us through that pretty quickly. Thank you.
Member Ullman, any last comments?
Nope.
All right. Okay, then, this is the time for public comment. As always, I'm going to ask you to state your name first, and you will be given 2 minutes. And one of the things that I try to do is get you to your 2. I'm really giving you 2.5. I got tapped on the shoulder for that. I'm giving you 2 minutes, and then what I'm saying is, okay, the last 30 minutes, 30 seconds. Now, I just want to say this. When I'm saying this is your last 30 seconds, I'm giving you the opportunity to close. I am not cutting you off. So I want to make sure that when I'm saying 30 more seconds, that you're wrapping it up and you're not, you don't feel like I'm cutting you off, because that's not my intention. So with that being said, state your name and then go ahead.
How you doing? Ron Tompkins. So a couple of things about the meeting. The social equity component, I think you guys kind of mixing it up with some of the people kind of mixing it up with diversity. I think when you include the people that have been targeted, these drug laws or whatever, that will be your diversity. That will be your inclusion. That will be your females. That'll be everything you're looking for. In Illinois, they set up the social equity component where they use different communities, they did use the SNAP benefits. They use 5 of the last 10 years that you lived in that social that area. Doesn't have to be consecutive, but 5 of the 10 years or an arrest. So those are determining factors where you can determine those areas and probably get like a true social equity applicant. In Illinois, strange things happened where MSOs came in, identified the people, and signed them all up. So many of our people that had a social equity. MSOs, multi-state operators. Multi-state operators. What they do is they identify the people and they actually target them and they utilize them and buy them out down the line. So in order to create within your community, to benefit within your community, the correct people actually have to be the 51%.
Last 30 seconds.
One of the things that I did notice you guys say kind of like you all want to benefit the guys that got the license now. And in a sense, they're the problem because they have a monopoly and it's almost like a monopoly is being protected. In Illinois, for example, they have to put into a fund. All the fees for the application fees go to the disproportionate people. That's how they run the entire program. Not all 5% of the fees. All of those fees for the application go to fund 0% loans if you obtain that license. So we have loans up to $1 million in our state. They range anywhere from $250,000, depending on the type of license you have, to $1 million, all created through that fund. So I think a lot of things can happen through licensure funds instead of taxing, because you have to go through so many things for taxation. You have to find ways, well, how can I fund
Thank you for your
this?
comment.
And it's through application fees, it's through fees. And the education also has to happen for when people do get the social equity licenses, right? So that means that, yes, these are people that are running it now. They are obligated to educate, right? Because they have a monopoly. Thank you. I'll be back at the next meeting.
Thank you for your comment.
Sorry, Chair.
That's okay.
Good afternoon, Chair. For the record, my name is Timothy Eliado. I'm representing Timovario. And yeah, we're back at social equity, and I just have some few pointers I wanted to include. I'm still advocating for the fact that consumption lounges is still not a sustainable means for minorities to enter this industry. We have, and then looking back to, I heard conversations about caregivers. That's what some of us were. And during the process, we had to, you know, within the scope of the rules, we were, in a way, you had to, literally, we put our lives on the line. I don't know how any other ways to put this. We put our lives on the line. We started this industry in the terms that any seed, supposedly, legally, that was planted in a cultivation facility had to be obtained from patients at one point, clones. We set up that system. Without that system, there wouldn't be the system that we currently have. We are plant breeders in this industry. What this panel is missing is people that actually have experience in this industry, that have in-depth understanding about how this industry operates. Education is key when we're talking about sustainability for minorities in this industry.
30 more seconds.
Please wait till when I'm done speaking. I appreciate that 30 seconds acknowledgement, but it always interrupts me, so thanks for the time.
Thank you for your comment.
Hello, my name is Timothy McCoy. I'd like to thank you guys for your time and effort on trying to make these things happen. I appreciate a lot of things, but for the social equity things, I've just been, from sheer location, just been knocked out of that particular realm. If you're not living in a zip code or wherever that's downtrodden, you might be somebody who's a veteran. I am a veteran, I'm a minority. I tick a lot of the boxes, but because of I don't live in an area code, zip code where this is, I'm now out of that particular whole thing. So I'm now into the diversity category where I'm competing against people with a lot more money. There's only 20 licenses, 10 of them go to social equity. I thought this was supposed to be inclusion of more minority type businesses because we are the persons who've been disproportionately affected the most. And also I have a suggestion as well as on the investment and who you can buy these products from. I personally think that all these consumption lounges should have the same opportunity to buy from the manufacturers as opposed to distributors or dispensaries who will tax you again. So your profit margins will be, once you cut out a middleman, you've changed the profit margins. So they should be able to be allowed to buy directly from a manufacturer.
Last 30 seconds.
And as I said, the diversity, women get a diversity, men should get the same as, you know, I understand that you guys are more of a minority, but not really actually. I think you're not. But I think that's something for discussion. I think we need to try to come together with more. You don't need to have a record in order to get a social equity thing. You don't need to live in a bad zip code in order to get a social equity thing. If you qualify every other way and you're a minority who we were supposed to be helping in this, I think that should be enough as far as diversity as opposed to the inclusion. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comment. Are there any other public comments? If not, we are adjourned. I see you guys on the 18th. See you all on the 18th. Thank you very much for your time.
Sure.